Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dive into something pretty incredible. We're heading to the very end of the book of Numbers to look at this fascinating moment in history. I mean, think about it. How does an entire nation about to get its own country for the first time even begin to plan a just and fair society? We're talking from the ground up.
Okay, so picture this. After 40 years of wandering in the desert, this is it. This is the moment. The Israelites have finally arrived. Can you just imagine that feeling? Standing there on the plains of Moab and looking right across the Jordan River at Jericho. You can see it. They are literally at the edge of the Promised Land. This is a massive turning point. It's the moment they stop being nomads and start becoming a nation with a home.
So you got to wonder, right? How in the world do you take this massive group of people and turn them into a stable nation? Well, it turns out there are some huge problems you've got to solve first. And that's what we're going to break down. We'll look at how they handled everything, from recapping their insane journey to figuring out how to divide an entire country fairly. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty, creating justice systems for priests and even for refugees, protecting a daughter's right to inherit, and finally, laying down the last set of laws for their brand new home.
All right, so before we jump into the future, we really have to take a second and appreciate the journey that got them here. I mean, this was absolutely monumental. We're not talking about just a long walk. This was a 40-year epic. It's what forged their entire identity as a people.
And wow, when you look back, it's just so much history packed into a short time. They break free from 430 years of slavery in Egypt, and in that very first year, they get the law at Mount Sinai. That's what really turns them into what you'd call a theocratic nation, a nation governed by God's laws. But then, for almost 4 decades, they're in the wilderness. By the time they finally get to Moab, a whole generation has passed. Key leaders, people like Miriam and Aaron, they're gone. This is a brand new generation ready for a brand new land.
And just to really get a sense of the scale here, this wasn't some small band of people. We're talking about a moving city of over 2 million people. Think about that. Kids, elders, all their animals, the whole shebang. The very fact that this massive population survived for 40 years in a brutal desert, well, that's really presented as the central miracle of their story. And you have to keep that in mind, because it's the backdrop for everything that's about to happen.
Okay, so that brings us to their first huge challenge. You've been promised this land. Awesome. But what happens when you actually get there? How do you divide it up between hundreds of thousands of families without it all just turning into a chaotic free-for-all? This was a huge logistical and social puzzle they had to solve.
And that's the exact question staring them in the face. It just couldn't be first come, first served. They needed a system that every single person would look at and say, okay, that's legitimate, that's fair. And the solution they came up with? It was a direct command.
So, here's the key. Their method was something called casting lots. Now, when we hear that, we probably think of, rolling dice or drawing straws, just random chance. But for the Israelites, it was the complete opposite. They believed that by using these sacred objects that the high priest kept, it was actually God himself making the choice. It was a way to take human bias right out of the equation and stop arguments before they could even start. Pretty smart, right? And what I love about this is that it wasn't just some mystical, let's see what happens event. Nope. It was a super organized process. You have new leaders in charge, Joshua and Eleazar the priest. You have a representative from every single tribe right there. The lots would decide which piece of land a tribe got, but then, and this is the really practical part, the size of that land was adjusted based on how big the tribe was. It's this amazing mix of divine will and just plain old common sense fairness.
All right, so dividing up the big chunks of land is one thing, but what about the people who don't really fit into that system? There were a couple of really important special cases they had to figure out. What to do about the priestly tribe, and what to do with people who had killed someone.
And really, these are critical questions for any society, right? First, if the Levites are supposed to be dedicated to religious service and don't get any farmland, how are they supposed to live? And second, in a culture where blood vengeance is a real thing, what happens if a death is just a tragic accident and not a cold-blooded murder?
The solution they came up with for the Levites was all about community. Since they were set apart to serve the tabernacle, they didn't get a big chunk of territory like the other tribes. Instead, every other tribe pitched in, giving them cities and pasture lands to live in. And check out that principle of fairness showing up again. The tribes with more land gave more cities. Everyone understood it was a shared responsibility for the whole nation.
Now, out of these 48 cities that the Levites received, 6 of them were extra special. They weren't just for the Levites to live in. No, they were designed to play this incredibly important role in the nation's justice system. These were known as the cities of refuge.
And this is where we see a really fascinating legal idea emerge. The law makes a huge distinction based on intent. Was it on purpose? If someone committed intentional murder while they faced execution. But if the killing was a genuine accident, that person could literally run to one of these 6 cities for safety. Once they were there, they were protected from any avenger of blood, and they were guaranteed a fair trial. It was a legal safeguard, and honestly, a profound act of mercy.
So you might be wondering, how long did they have to stay there? Well, the person who killed someone by accident could only go home safely after the current high priest died. The thinking behind this, theologically, was that the high priest's death was such a major event that it could symbolically pay the price for that accidental loss of life. It was what allowed the person to finally be restored to their community.
All right, let's get to the last big challenge we're going to talk about today. And this one's fascinating because it's all about looking to the future. It's about trying to preserve the integrity of the nation, not just for now, but for generations down the road.
So this next question wasn't some theoretical what if. No, this was a real-life issue brought up by the leaders from the tribe of Manasseh. See, there was this case with the daughters of a man named Zelophehad. They had already won the right to inherit their dad's land because he didn't have any sons. But now, those leaders saw a new problem coming.
Okay, so here's the problem. If these daughters, who now own the land, marry men from a different tribe, well, that land goes with them. It would effectively leave the tribe of Manasseh forever. And that was a huge deal because tribal land was seen as this permanent, God-given inheritance. The solution was actually pretty elegant. The daughters' right to inherit, totally upheld. But there was one condition. They had to marry someone from within their own tribe. It was a perfect way to balance their individual rights with keeping the tribe's heritage intact.
You know, what's really powerful about this whole story is the process itself. You have these leaders coming to Moses with a totally legitimate concern. And Moses, he listens. He seeks guidance. And then he creates a new law. It just goes to show you a legal system that could actually adapt and respond to the real needs of its people. That's a pretty powerful example of leadership. So, as we start to wrap this all up, what's the big takeaway? What does all this add up to? Well, these last few chapters of Numbers, they're not just some random list of rules. They're actually a blueprint for how to build a just and stable society from scratch. I mean, just look at the core values baked into these laws. There's a deep commitment to fairness, a really sophisticated sense of justice that actually considers a person's intent, a radical idea of mercy to protect the innocent, and this forward-thinking concern for preserving heritage. This was the moral and legal foundation they were supposed to build their entire nation on.
And that was it. This was the final word from Moses on that side of the Jordan River. Their history was written down, their laws were set, and they had a plan. They were, at long last, ready to cross over and start their new life as a nation in their own land.
And all of this kind of leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? When you look at these ancient ideas, fairness, justice based on intent, providing refuge, balancing individual rights with the good of the community, how do those foundational principles still shape and maybe even challenge our own modern ideas of justice, of law, and what it really means to build a truly fair community today?